RNZ International, World and Pacific News. Kia ora, I'm Nicola Wright. Leading this bulletin in world news, the White House has moved to quell rumours the Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is about to be sacked. In Pacific News with Tim Glasgow, police in Papua New Guinea say they've received the final coroner's report into the death of journalist Rosalind Albaniel-Evara, and their investigation will continue. And later in sport with Moira Tuila-Epitela, Samoa faces a daunting start to the Men's World Sevens Series, which kicks off a new campaign tonight in Dubai. The White House has moved to quell rumours the Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is about to be sacked. There are reports in the US media that President Donald Trump is planning to oust Mr. Tillerson and replace him with the Director of the CIA, Mike Pompeo. The pair have had a strained relationship over issues such as North Korea, and in October Mr. Tillerson was reported to have privately called the president a moron. The White House has put out a statement saying Mr. Tillerson continues to lead the State Department and there are no personnel announcements at this time. The Dutch authorities are investigating how a Bosnian Croat war criminal managed to smuggle poison into a Hague courtroom to kill himself during a televised appeal hearing. Slobodan Praljak, who's 72, died in hospital shortly after taking the poison, after declaring he was innocent. His 20-year sentence for war crimes in Bosnia had just been reaffirmed. Some Bosnian Croats have held vigils to remember a man they regard as a hero, and the Croatian Prime Minister has made a scathing attack on the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, which tried him. Aid workers in Syria say 500 people with urgent medical needs must be evacuated from a besieged rebel-held enclave on the outskirts of the capital, Damascus. The United Nations humanitarian advisor Jan Egeland says not a single person had left the eastern Ghouta district in 2 months.
Men with power are sitting with lists of children that are in urgent need of being evacuated. If not, they will, many of them, die. And we still do not have the green light.
Jan Egeland. The Ghouta district has been surrounded by Syrian regime forces for more than 4 years, and last month the UN estimated up to 400,000 people were trapped. Customs officials at a Chinese airport had a nasty surprise when they opened a couple's luggage and discovered it contained hundreds of live cockroaches. Security at southern Guangdong's International Airport noticed movement in the elderly couple's luggage when they placed their bags through an X-ray machine. When questioned, the husband told officials the insects were needed for an ointment for his wife's skin. Chinese officials say the cockroaches are used in an old folk remedy in which they are mixed with some medicinal cream. That's the latest world news.
Pacific Regional News from RNZ International. Talofa lava, I'm Tim Glasgow. Police in Papua New Guinea say they have received the final coroner's report into the death of journalist Rosalind Albaniel-Evara, and their investigation will continue. An initial report released early last month said the cause of death was undetermined due to the effects of embalming. The initial report outraged Ms. Evara's family, who had displayed photographs at her funeral showing what appeared to be recent and severe injuries. The lead police investigator, Ulavis Manto, says they have reviewed the final post-mortem report and will not comment further until the investigation is complete. The police have given no indication how much longer they expect the investigation to take. A psychologist in Fiji says she finds it hard to believe that a 7-year-old could commit suicide. Local police have appealed to parents to ensure the safety of their children after the death of 4 young people last week, including the suicides of a 16-year-old and a 7-year-old. Selena Corolesa, who runs her own consultancy company, says there are a number of strategies to tackle the issue of youth suicide, like a crisis and counselling line, but the traditional family unit needs to do its job of providing support. But Ms. Corolesa says the latest cases are incomprehensible.
This is really sad if it is indeed true that it is ruled a suicide, because psychologically and looking at it from a psychology model, it's quite difficult to comprehend how a 7-year-old would understand that if I do this, I'm not coming back to life. So it's quite difficult to just get my head around that.
Selena Corolesa. The Electoral Commission in Tonga has returned the election writs to King Tupou VI, setting the stage for the formation of government. The interim speaker, Lord Tangi, can now invite the successful candidates from the November 16 election to submit nominations for Prime Minister. Koro Vakauta reports.
The soon-to-be sworn-in MPs have 2 weeks to submit their nominations to Tangi before a secret ballot's held within another 3 more days of that deadline. Before the ballot, nominees are given a chance to speak, and other MPs may speak in support of their respective candidate. Tangi will report the result to the palace before the Prime Minister designates someone to be appointed by the King. After this, a Speaker and a Deputy Speaker will be elected. The Prime Minister will then select his cabinet. Interim Prime Minister Akalisi Pohiva's Democratic Party won 14 of the 17 People's seats during the election, but there are also 9 Nobles representatives to be reckoned with in the 26-member legislature. This is Koro Vakauta.
The French Navy is reported to have intercepted 2 so-called blue boats fishing illegally off New Caledonia. According to Les Nouvelles Calédoniennes, the boats, which are believed to be from Vietnam, were caught near the island of Belep on Thursday morning with bêche de mer on board. The French High Commission has told the news site that the boats and their 30 crew are being towed to Nouméa. Earlier this year, there were multiple arrests in New Caledonia, where French naval surveillance spotted dozens of boats in operation. Several Vietnamese captains caught in New Caledonia are serving jail sentences, while a large number of sailors have been deported. Earlier this year, the Forum Fisheries Agency said the Vietnamese blue boats should be labelled reef robbers for their persistent illegal activities around Melanesian islands. The Vamino Green MP in Papua New Guinea says troops from neighbouring Indonesia continue to make cross-border incursions into PNG. Belden Nama has called for more resourcing for PNG's defence force to protect the international border, which his electorate abuts. Indonesian troops have chased Free West Papua Movement members from Indonesia's Papua region who flee into PNG for decades. Mr. Nama says the border is poorly protected from PNG's side.
We also continue to have incursion by Indonesian troops to our side of the border, and our people also continue to live in fear because of this problem between Indonesia and the West Papua people, those fighting for freedom.
Belden Nama says the PNG government is failing to address these border problems, which he describes as a serious national issue. He says, for example, the trafficking of guns are having a major impact on PNG's LNG project in the highlands. Media reports from New Caledonia say another attempt will be made today to form a government which would end a 3-month political impasse. The territory has been without a properly constituted government since August because the only presidential candidate, Philippe Germain, repeatedly failed to get a majority of the 11 government ministers to vote for him. Local television says it understands that the French High Commissioner will convene the ministers to try to re-elect Mr. Germain as president. This comes as New Caledonia is awaiting the arrival of the French Prime Minister, Edouard Philippe, this weekend for an official visit to discuss preparations for next year's independence referendum. Media reports say both pro- and anti-independence politicians have held several rounds of talks. The anti-independence Caledonian Republicans, which have refused to vote for Mr. Germain, have issued a statement saying they will never approve a secret deal. The statement says there will be a great deal for the public. There will be a deal for the public and one to be kept private, which will move New Caledonia further away from France. New research led by a New Zealand university will look at how the present treatment for rheumatic fever affects different ethnic groups, particularly Pacific and Māori people. Figures show Pacific and Māori children and young adults have the highest rates of rheumatic fever in New Zealand. Victoria University's Diane Sika Pautonu and her fellow researchers will investigate how penicillin treatment has been working across different populations. The initial studies were carried out on US soldiers in the 1950s. Dr. Sika Pautonu has been awarded an extra $170,000 to look into the issue. She said it was clear better information was needed on how the drug works. And that's the latest Pacific regional news from RNZ International. Now with sports news, here's Moira Tuelepa Taylor.
Mahalo. Samoa faces a daunting start to the Men's World 7 Series, which kicks off a new campaign tonight in Dubai. The Māori ranked 13 last season and only managed to make the Cup quarterfinals once in 10 tournaments. Coach Sir Gordon Titchens believes a top 8 finish is achievable this time around, but nothing can be taken for granted.
To do well in a World Series, you've got to get off to a good start. So we certainly have got a very, very tough pool, probably the pool of death, really, if you look at all the pools. So it's New Zealand first up, which is going to be a toughie, and USA and Argentina. So no easy games looking ahead.
Titchens was unable to coach Samoa at last year's Dubai tournament because he was still under contract with New Zealand, but feels a lot of progress has been made in the past 9 to 12 months.
Obviously, last year I inherited lots of players, and I've actually gone out and sort of looked for a lot of newer players to add competition to spots on the side and looking to create and build depth. And we've been to 2 tournaments already. I took 2 different sides, and they both acquitted themselves very, very well. And so out of both those teams, one for the Oceania tournament and one for the Silicon competition that we had in the States, I basically halved it up, and I've got 8 from one side and 6 from the other team. So, they're really pushing for spots. And
South Africa are the defending world champions and beat Fiji in last year's Dubai final. Fiji beat the Blitz Box at a pre-season tournament in October, but coach Gareth Bader said recently they were a difficult team to gauge in between campaigns.
I know they do things very much domestically, and a lot of teams come in to compete against them in South Africa as well, which is a good benefit for them. The Oceania tournament was on live stream, so people get to see that, and Silicon Valley was as well, as was the Germany tournament. So what we can pick up through our analysts and see is very beneficial to us. But essentially, I've got to get what we're getting right here, and the more I concentrate on that, I keep the focus of the players. It's very much a Fijian way: worry about yourself and get out and do your job. So that's what I'll be looking for them to do.
Fiji face Russia first up in Dubai, followed by pool games against Wales and Australia. A Tahiti team will not take part in the Pacific Mini Games, with the territory's athletes to compete under a neutral banner, following the French Polynesia government's decision to boycott the event. The government withdrew their support following a disagreement over who should represent Tahiti in boxing and rugby sevens in Vanuatu. The Pacific Games Council's chief executive, Andrew Minogue, says a 4-member boxing team have confirmed their attendance, while the rugby sevens side is also down to compete. He says all other sports have chosen not to participate in Port Vila because of the government boycott, so the council's executive board has ruled.
The position of the PGC is we do wish to respect the protocols around national representation. So if the Tahiti government's not endorsing the team in place, then the athletes will compete under our banner, so we're not causing any embarrassment back home.
Andrew Minogue says that Tahitians athletes will enter under the Pacific Games Council flag during Monday's opening ceremony, and if they win any medals, it will be a PGC flag that is raised. The Black Caps are a couple of hours away from the opening test of their summer of international cricket against the West Indies in Wellington, and the New Zealand captain Kane Williamson is wary of the athletic tourists. The Black Caps are 4th on the Test world rankings and heavy favourites to beat the West Indies, who ranked 8th above only Bangladesh and Zimbabwe. However, Williamson was impressed by the Windies' win in England earlier this year and says they shouldn't be underestimated.
We always know when we play West Indies that they've got so much talent that on their day they can beat anyone. They have a very good pace attack, and we saw how disciplined they bowled in England, which was obviously important to maintain that pressure, and they did it really well. So they have a bit of X factor. They do move the ball, so it'll be a really tough challenge.
Kane Williamson, the test starts at 11 o'clock. And New Zealand is through to the quarterfinals of the Men's World Team Squash Championships in France, reaching the last 8 for the first time in over 20 years. The New Zealanders defeated Spain 2-0 in the last 16, with Campbell Grayson and Paul Cole winning their respective matches to set up a contest against Australia in the quarterfinals. The last time New Zealand made the top 8 at the tournament was in 1995, when they finished 7th. That's the news.
Kia ora, this is Deadline Pacific from RNZ International. I'm Koroi Hawkins. In the program today, well-known Australian doctors have put up their hands to help Manus refugees. Fiji police appealed to parents to keep their children safe after the deaths of 4 kids last week. Advocates for survivors of gender-based violence in the Pacific urge police to apply a zero-tolerance approach. And Bougainville's president wants answers from the PNG Prime Minister about funding shortfalls for the autonomous region. Prominent Australian doctors have asked for permission to go to Manus Island to care for refugees. In an open letter to the government, 18 senior physicians say their country's reputation has been damaged by inadequate healthcare on the island. Ben Robinson-Drawbridge talked to the group's spokesperson, Laureate Professor Nick Talley.
Basically, we've asked the Australian government for their permission, because we require this, to go to Manus Island and do health assessments. Our goal is to ensure the asylum seekers and the refugees are being adequately managed. We felt that based on the information that was being reported both in the press and to us privately, that this was an important issue and we needed to address it sooner rather than later. And these are health assessments ought to be happening now. We've had no response from the government.
Why now did you write the letter? I mean, they've been there for 4 years.
Well, when I was president of the College of Physicians, and indeed over the last 5 years, I and many others have been asking the government to do all sorts of things in terms of dealing with the health of the asylum seekers and refugees. This is not a new issue and it's not a new position. However, the recent issue in particular for the men on Manus who've just been moved to other accommodation was yet another alarm bell in a series of alarm bells about the health of these people. We have an obligation as a country, as a nation, to ensure appropriate and best health. Now, there have been improvements, we've been advised, in terms of health delivery over this period of time, over the last 5 years or so, but we continue to have concerns about some of the issues, and particular concerns with the men based on the physical and environmental conditions they've been facing.
Yeah, if we could talk about some of those. We know that they haven't had access to water for some time. What are the dangers of that?
Well, there's all sorts of dangers in their current situation. Contaminated water could certainly be a serious issue. There's the issue around vector-borne infections like mosquitoes and whether they've had adequate protections, access to medications, whether that's been reasonable in the current situation is unclear, access to medical care and medical specialists where needed. The adequacy of that has also been unclear. And there's also, of course, their mental and physical well-being from other factors too in the environment. So all of this is worrying, and we felt as senior doctors in Australia that we needed to yet again voice our concerns about what's going on and try to do something. We really were genuine, and we remain genuine in trying to do something.
It seems to be quite a notable group of individuals who signed this letter, yet you've had no response, yet over the years it seems the government has really not said much to you about the health of these men.
Well, we've certainly spoken to government from time to time, directly and indirectly, but we have faced no wish to engage with us or any other group. There is an advisory group to government, although I understand they're not usually approached either in terms of these issues. So from the information we've had, there's just been a lack of adequate medical input, and I don't think that's acceptable.
Could we call it the politicisation of their healthcare?
Well, look, I'm not a politician, and my interest here is not the politics. My interest is the health of these people who we have a responsibility for, and that's the interest of everyone else who's signed that document. And I think it's the interest of many health practitioners in the country. It's not just us. But at this stage, it's become a political issue. This seems very unfortunate and, frankly, inappropriate.
It seems that your group is not only worried about the health of the men, you fear other ramifications of the situation.
Well, we certainly expressed in this letter our concern that Australia's reputation was being put at risk. That's our personal view of this. The government may have a very different view about this, but certainly one could argue that Australia's international reputation is potentially has been damaged by what appears to be inadequate health care being delivered, yes. Now, again, we're basing our comments on unverified, at this stage, information from multiple sources, but certainly we haven't heard any evidence to the contrary.
Laureate Professor Nick Talley speaking there to Benjamin Robinson Drawbridge. Fiji police have appealed to parents to keep their children safe over the school holiday period after the deaths of 4 children last week. Police say 1 child was found floating in a river, another was hit by a car, and 2, a 16-year-old and a 7-year-old, took their own lives. The suicide cases in particular have raised concerns, as Korovaka Uta reports.
Police spokesperson Ananai Soro says members of the force have attended end-of-school-year awards to encourage children to be safe and parents to take care of their young ones. Police have reported the country has averaged more than 225 suicide cases or attempts a year for the past 6 years. Ms. Naisoro says when it comes to youth suicide, parents need to communicate more with their children.
There's just a need for parents and guardians to spend quality time with their children. Sit with them, talk to them. That is one of the messages from the Commissioner down to the other officers who have been setting out while at school award ceremonies, that our children are growing up in an environment, in a society that is much more different from their time. So they need to be more understanding.
The director of the Suicide Prevention Service Lifeline is Achana Mani. She says the latest cases highlight a concerning increase in child suicides, particularly of those under the age of 13.
As we have moved on in 2017, we've seen about, ranging from 5 to 10 cases of child suicide. So definitely there has been a dramatic increase with this regard.
Psychologist Selina Kuruletha finds the suicide of a 7-year-old hard to understand.
This is really sad if it is indeed true that it is ruled a suicide, because psychologically and looking at it from a psychology model, it's quite difficult to comprehend how a 7-year-old would understand that if I do this, I'm not coming back to life. So it's quite difficult to just get my head around that.
Ms. Kuruletha says there are a number of strategies to tackle the issue, like a crisis and counselling line through the Ministry of Social Welfare.
That's one way. The other is just going back to the family and what's happening at the family level. We're supposed to be a community that revolves around the family, but obviously there are problems there.
Ms. Kuruletha is advocating for more family time and less time in front of TV, phone or computer screens. Achanamani agrees, but says the traditional family structures are changing.
In the Pacific, the concept is around a village bringing up a child. So what that means is there is a whole lot of opportunities for a child to ask for help or to seek support, if you may. But now with the emerging family structures, those support structures are very fast eroding, and hence there are limited opportunities for kids of this age to ask for help.
Ms. Mani says parents need to communicate more with their children and watch for changes in personality. She also says suicide prevention programs need to drastically change.
All the awareness programs needs to be revamped and turned into child-sensitive programs, shifting the conversations around the method of completing suicide to turning it into more about seeking help, communicating these sort of messages in child-friendly languages as opposed to jargon which actually creates curiosity as opposed to empowering young kids.
Ms. Mani says while children tend to use the ministry's crisis line, her service is hearing more from parents and teachers asking for advice on how to deal with young people having suicidal thoughts. This is Korovaka Uta.
Civil society organisations working with survivors of gender-based violence in the Pacific are urging police in the region to apply zero-tolerance approaches to gender-based violence. The Fiji and Tonga Women and Children's Crisis Centres, in partnership with the Australian Federal Police, are hosting police executives from all around the Pacific in Fiji this week, training them in best practice when dealing with survivors of violence. The Fiji Crisis Centre's Shamima Ali told me cultural and religious belief systems are the biggest obstacles to justice for women.
Police are major stakeholders. That's where people will go first. We don't have counselling centres everywhere. And that response is so important for the survival of a woman who is in a domestic violence situation or who has been raped, and, bringing perpetrators to justice. So it's very important. But, one of the things that we find with the police officers is the barriers for them are the religious and cultural belief systems. So, and the values they grow up with, keeping the families together. Family is so important in the Pacific, and often, this expectation that the responsibility on women to keep the family together, to be self-sacrificial, endure whatever hardships, that's a lot in life. So with that attitude, the police also come in, and that is what they use in responding. So they forget the crime that has been committed, which actually poses a great risk to women's lives and children's lives. They forget about that, and everything else is overshadowed by this whole belief system. So it's really important for us to work with police, to work with them to get rid of that notion.
Does this impact, I understand there's recent studies in Fiji that women are reporting things a lot later, or a lot longer after having an incident occur. Do you think this is playing into all of that in terms of the confidence women have in coming to police that actually something might be done?
Yes, well, that is one thing, but women themselves often feel that it's normal for their partners, their husbands, to beat them up. And often women will say, when you ask them, why did he beat you up? Oh, it's for disobedience, it's for refusing to have sex with him, or I wasn't a good wife, and so on. So they also are justifying the violence. They've internalized that, societal attitude. And when they do come out, it takes them a long time when they realize, no, this is wrong, I can't take it anymore. The kind of response they get makes them turn back into the violent situations because the response hasn't been appropriate, it has been insensitive, not only from police but also from faith-based organizations, her pastor, her local pastor, a neighbor, a family member that she goes, the same attitude that continues to keep women in the cycle of violence.
The theme this year, Leave No One Behind. What does that mean for Fiji and where you're at in your struggle?
Well, it means that everyone who is a survivor, who is going through this, we all have accountability to them. And we must also, within this milieu, look at women with disabilities, girls with disabilities, children with disabilities, who are far more vulnerable. We also have got people from the LGBTQ communities, the transgender women, transgender men, gay men, who are also subjected to this kind of violence. And it also is about policies, about resources, and we also have climate change and violence against women. And we also have to resource the implementation of the very beautiful, good laws that we have in our countries. And we all have to be on the same page. We have to have a rights-based approach, that this is a gross violation of human rights when women are treated in this manner. So we have to be on the same page to have effective strategies that are meaningful and that actually save lives.
The Fiji Women Crisis Centre's Shamima Ali. This is Deadline Pacific. You're listening to RNZ International. Still to come, we hear how Tahiti athletes competing at the Pacific Mini Games next week will do so under a neutral banner. But first, the president of Bougainville, John Momas, says he'll want answers from the Papua New Guinea Prime Minister Peter O'Neill when they meet next month. The joint supervisory body set up to help with the implementation of the Bougainville Peace Agreement has had a series of meetings deferred by the national government, but is set to meet on December the 14th. A critical issue for Bougainville remains Port Moresby's failure to meet its obligations to properly fund the autonomous region. Mr. Momas says the national government owes Bougainville more than $276 million in restoration development grants and another $61 million from the Special Intervention Fund. Port Moresby challenges the figures, but Mr. Momas told Don Wiseman the national government does accept it owes $110 million.
What they are claiming to be based on their so-called proper interpretation of the formula, even that they have not paid us. Ours is much, much more than that, of course, and even the agreed amount according to their interpretation of the formula has not been released to Bougainville. By their own admission, they are negligent and therefore in breach of the peace agreement.
The economy, though, is in absolute tatters, isn't it, at the moment? The budget that's being brought in this week is going to involve a lot of belt tightening, so will you get the money this time?
Well, we are hoping against hope. We are very worried that we might not get what we are entitled to. that has not stopped us from relentlessly talking to the national government, trying to impress on them the importance of giving us what we are entitled to so that we can, by providing services and taking care of the other important responsibilities under the peace agreement, be in a position to create a conducive climate for the two parties, namely the national government and the ABG, to jointly implement the peace agreement and including the implementation of the referendum.
Another critical factor is this shareholding in BCL that Peter O'Neill offered about a year ago to the landowners of Bougainville, but I understand nothing has happened since that offer was first.
Engagement, you are creating a situation where there could be adversarial engagement that may not get a good outcome. At this juncture of the long process of finding a democratic, just solution of the Bougainville bloody war, we must not succumb to pressures that try to undermine the peace agreement. I think it is very important that we must persevere in our commitment.
That is the President of Bougainville, John Momas. An official Tahiti team will not be part of the Pacific Mini Games, with the territory's athletes to compete under a neutral banner following the French Polynesia government's decision to boycott the event. The government withdrew support following a disagreement over who should represent Tahiti in boxing and rugby sevens in Port Vila. The Pacific Games Council's chief executive, Andrew Minow, told Vinnie Wiley a boxing delegation will attend the Games while rugby sevens is expected to follow suit.
But the other sports are not, as a result of the boycott from the government. The position of the PGC is we do wish to respect the protocols around national representation. So if the Tahiti government's not endorsing the team and there's no NOC or what we call PGA in place, then the athletes will compete under our banner. So we're not causing any embarrassment back home. The athletes parade at the opening ceremony, they'll come in second to last, just before the home team, Vanuatu, and they'll be under the PGC flag. And similarly, if they win any medals in the two sports, they're competing in similarly of the PGC flag raised, not the Tahiti flag.
So the council has always been keen for the athletes to participate, and you said that as long as the federations were recognised and they'd registered, you were happy for them to come. So when was this designation made to compete under the banner? Would the decision have to be made, or is that always the way it stood?
No, that's just a decision that our executive board took. The government's made it clear that these two sports are coming and they're not able to represent Tahiti. That's their position. We're trying to respect the fact that we don't want to cause them sort of further embarrassment over this. But those two sports are entitled to be here because of the affiliations that they have with AIBA, the International Boxing, and the World Rugby. So I think it's sort of the fairest solution, and it does follow the protocols that you've probably noticed at other games, like the Olympics, where you have the refugee team, and East Timor, which we had in 2000. So there is that scope for certain athletes to be able to participate in the games, but under the sort of owner's flag rather than a national country flag.
Has this happened before at a Pacific or Pacific Mini Games?
Not that I'm aware of. Certainly not in my time going back into the last 10 years or so.
If the Tahitian athletes do win a medal in their respective sports, how does that equate to the table or that sort of thing?
If they win a medal, the PGC is the designation under the medal tally. So Tahiti has been removed and PGC has been put in its place.
Chief Executive of the Pacific Games Council, Andrew No, speaking there to Vinnie Wiley. And that's Dateline Pacific from RNZ International, Tofa.
While I appreciate there are two Lynch brothers in the band, you and your brother, the name change is probably a smart move, especially if you have your sights set on America with Black Lives Matter and all that.
Yeah.
Lynch could be interpreted as incendiary. Nonetheless, it obviously wouldn't have been an easy decision to change the name to Lankum.
No, and I mean, it was a decision that definitely made very bad business sense, whatever way you want to look at it. But we felt like it was just morally imperative to go through that. I mean, we didn't feel like we could carry on with the old name, especially, the way things are going now in the world. I think there's a really dangerous spread and acceptance of right-wing ideas right across the Western world. I don't think it's any time to be sitting on the fence about such matters. So, me and my brother, we originally coined the name Lynch. We started off in about the year 2000 or 2003. We were originally going under the moniker of the Lynch brothers, and somehow that got shortened down to Lynched, and it was something we always kind of held on to, and it was never an issue. I mean, here in Ireland, it means if you get jumped on by a gang of lads, you'd say that's getting lynched, or just hanging in general. But I mean, it doesn't have the same racial connotations that it would have over in the States, for example. Yeah, but we found, I mean, as soon as we started playing outside of our own kind of scene, and we started playing in, like, even in England or in European countries, people had this kind of connection to the name, and they'd be kind of asking us about it, and we thought, geez, this is only going to get worse, really, And the name of your band is the first thing that people see, and if it's attached to all these, these kind of negative aspects, then that's not something we want to continue with. So we decided, we're just going to change it, and we'll deal with whatever happens, Born
to live and lying embers of a cold old fire. Nobody remembers they hand the ashes back to me down the button factory where cattle at the stall.
There's something about siblings singing together. You and your brother, have you and your brother always sung together, and do you share a mutual taste in music?
Yeah, we have since we were young. I suppose we would have been singing together and messing around. And yeah, no, I actually agree. I'm not not saying anything about us, but just for my own taste. I mean, hearing siblings singing together, I think there's just something to do with the harmony and the way the voices blend together that I think is really hard for other people to achieve. People who aren't related to each other. And I suppose we would have certain areas in the Venn diagram where our tastes do kind of come together, but we would also, be quite divergent, and he would listen to some stuff that I couldn't stand, and vice versa, So there's lots of fun when we're driving around in a van on tour, and there's ridiculous fights over what's put on the radio and all the rest of it.
Your people were warriors, your people were Gaels. You withstood the empire with your old ancient ways. You survived the famine, you've seen some dark days. Let's drink to the health of old Aaron.
You formed the band Lynch as an experimental sort of psychedelic folk punk duo, but how did the current lineup evolve and who plays what?
Oh, the current lineup, when we originally started, I would be playing tin whistle and my brother would be on the acoustic guitar, and it was just the two of us, obviously, mainly writing our own songs. So Cormac McDermott, he's the fiddle player, and Rady Peach, who plays concertina and harmonium. We would have met those two through just playing in traditional sessions around Dublin over the years. Just two people we got along with really well, and I mean, when you're playing with big groups of people in sessions informally the whole time, you kind of, you get to know after a while who you click with and who you work well with musically. So after a while we realised, there's something really going on with these two, and just the fact that we just got on so well, So the first Lynch, the record Cold Old Fire, we asked them to just kind of guest on a few tunes and to help us out. And then it kind of just worked so well, and we really clicked so well together that we asked them to stay on and just be a part of the band full time.
Oh, what will we do when we have no money? Oh, true lovers, what will we do then? Only walk through the town for a Hungary crown, and we'll yodel it over again.
The first single from the new album is called What Will We Do When We Have No Money, and it's a totally bewitching song. You guys are blessed with an incredible vocalist with Rati, but I was interested, can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of that song? Who actually wrote that song?
Well, it seems that it was written by the singer Mary Delaney. So Mary Delaney was an Irish traveller, and she was living over in England in the 70s. There was a couple from Liverpool, Jim Carroll and Pat McKenzie, and they were two folk song collectors, and they travelled, at this point in time anyway, they were travelling around England, and they were looking to collect songs from Irish travellers who were living in England. They recognised that Irish travellers had a very big repository of folk songs and traditional songs, especially the big, long narrative ballads that had long since died out amongst the settled community in Ireland, say, from the 40s or 50s or whatever. I mean, traditional singing was really dying a death in mainstream Irish society, due to all the usual factors like television, mass media, radio. But amongst the travellers, because they were living in different conditions, they were living largely on the side of the road, living in caravans with no electricity, they would still gather amongst each other around the campfire at night. They'd sing songs and they'd tell stories. So this kind of led to travellers, they held on to a lot of these ballads for a lot longer, basically, than the settled community. So these two collectors, Jim Carroll and Pat McKenzie, realising this, went to collect from Irish travellers in England. Mary Delaney was a woman that they got a lot of really great songs from. She had a very rich store of ballads of all types. But what will we do when we have no money? It seems that she composed this herself. There's been a good few people who've recorded it over the years, and a few people I've heard singing it around Dublin especially, but you can't really trace the song back before her, and before she was recorded in I think it was in 1973 she was recorded by this couple. But yeah, people think it's based on a song by Elizabeth Cronin, What Would You Do If You Married a Soldier, that maybe is a bit more well known. But obviously Mary Delaney has a different take, and I mean that's only a kind of conjecture on the collector's part, that it was a version of this song, but it definitely has its own feeling. And they said that she used to be kind of singing the song to herself when she was working away. She was a blind woman, by the way. I think she raised like 16 children in one caravan. Really extraordinary woman. So she used to just be composing new verses to this song the whole time. She wouldn't sing it the same way twice.
One thing that fascinates me about traveller songs is that they're songs that come from a tradition that has nothing to do with anyone else playing with you. It's in the air almost. I wondered if that's something you might agree with.
Well, I mean, yeah, in terms of the solo singing, absolutely, and that's something I suppose that would be common with, I mean, with the larger kind of community of traditional singing in Ireland. It's definitely not something that it would have been taken, you know, like in England you have harmony singing, there's lots of harmony singing, and in Scotland as well, people singing in big groups. But in the Irish kind of tradition, I think it was all solo singing. It'd be very rare for someone to join in. But with regards to travellers and their singing, it seems to be definitely have been just a part of their everyday life and something they would, you know, take part in, just going about their daily business. And as I said, it's such a rich part of their culture, and I think it's something that's not really recognised by a lot of people over here. You know, as you know, you're probably aware that travellers suffer under a lot of kind of social prejudices and are looked down upon in a lot of ways by the settled community. And I think people were more aware of this kind of, you know, the rich folklore that they had and their very distinctive culture, then I think, you know, they might be treated with a bit more respect.
Some rebel youth with placards have called his army blackguards and told the Irish youth just what to do. He has lost his occupation, let's sing in jubilation for Sergeant William Bailey to relive.
There's obviously a lot of Irish historical reference tracks that you've collected. Have you actually researched the history of these tracks?
Yeah, well, Sergeant William Bailey that you mentioned there, that's a song that we heard. There's a great Dublin singer called Luke Cheevers, and he's a man that we all really look up to, and he has a great store of songs, in particular Dublin songs. And we first heard him singing that song, but it turned out Beaton, who are perhaps more well known, but lots of great songs, a lot of ones that actually have come into traditional music as, you know, a genre or something. But I suppose when we talk about tradition, it's more of a process. You know, I think it's something that you know, songs can become traditional over time after they've passed from one person to another. They kind of enter into that stream of tradition.
Up and down the guards are pacing. No one can get through. Flight would mean assured that facing guns and barbed wire.
The song Peafogg's Soldiers then, that was composed in German, so that was written in, I think, 1933. It was in one of the first concentration camps in Germany, in a place called Bürgermoor. That was, I mean, it was like early opponents to the Third Reich. It was socialists and communists and trade unionists who were in this concentration camp. And so the story goes that they were forbidden from singing their own songs, and they had to take to composing their own. And the song Peafogg's Soldiers, I think Die Moor Soldaten was the original title, but this was one of the songs that they wrote. So yeah, I mean, that's another one that's entered the tradition over the years. I think it was quite in the Spanish Civil War, you know.